Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is the Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the former part, if we're truly honest. This is one of 2 new Garfield games that I have acquired in recent months. It took a month for it to really arrive. Last time I buy direct from the site, I guess, but what did I expect? If I'd waited a week, I could have had it from a UK supplier. But this is Skara Brae and the Anarchy, which I grabbed. Anarchy is over there. I've still yet to actually learn the thing. But this one I wanted to dive into first, because if there's one thing I like with resource management games, it is this idea of having stupid amounts of resources to juggle. Now that doesn't mean that you give me 50 resources, I'm going to love your game, but it's going to make me intrigued. And other games like, for example, Aura and the Boar, I've been wanting to try that for a while. My friend had it, we played it. Granted, I think it could use a 2nd edition update right about now. Maybe Awakened Realms could have a go with that, as well as Agricola. But I enjoy that game. It's got a lot of cool resources to juggle. And this one has, I think, 16 different resources to mess around with. Anything from, a piece of wood to a bit of corn to various types of animals, the bones. It's kind of insane, really. Now, I don't know jack about the location this is based on, Orkney Islands, northern Scotland, although it is a bit closer to home than New Zealand, I guess. But also I got to admit that this kind of historical anthology of games from Garfield Games have been very hit and miss with me. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the original, I forget what the roll and write was called, Hadrian's Wall. I wasn't a massive fan of that one. Ezra and Nehemiah is okay, but it's just another generic Euro with churn this for victory points and that, so it's like, that was probably a 6 out of 10 for me. The Raiders of Scythia, fine game, but I prefer to play Raiders of the North Sea. So it's, this sort of line of games have been less exciting for me than, say, the trilogy games, which I keep raving about with like the Tiger series in the North Sea and the West Kingdom. But I'm still intrigued to try anything that Garfield Games releases. A lot of the resources, nice small box, an hour play time, 1 to 4 players. Okay, let's give this a try and see if it's worth it.
Yes, get on with it!
Skara Brae is at its core a resource management game. You have over 16 resources to mess around with, a bunch of locations to gather said resources or convert X into Y and upgrade certain locations as well. And you'll have a few workers that will escalate as the game goes forward. You'll have round 1 with 1 worker, round 2 with 2 workers, and so forth. And you'll play 4 rounds with effectively 3 turns each. Now, I've played this both solo and multiplayer, but the rules are 95% the same between the two. We'll get on to, specifics with the multiplayer rules a little bit later, but for now I'm going to explain this from a solo perspective, because that's the main way I've played it. And the idea with this is that over the 4 rounds you have 3 turns where you will draw a certain amount of cards from the deck. So in solo mode you will draw 4 first turn, then 3 the next turn, then 2 the next turn. In multiplayer you have different sets laid out. And what you'll do is that you'll pick one of these cards, and some of them are just, they get you a resource and maybe score you some points. Some could be roof cards where they let you shelter residents from the feeding phase effectively at the end of a round. But for the most part, they're going to look something like this. You might find it tricky to see on there, but there'll be photos. And the idea is they'll come as settlers of different colors. The colors effectively match some of the resource gathering locations here. Now, I've been a little bit slapdash with my setup here, so I've got gather stuff in the wrong location for where it should be, so let's tidy that up just a second. There we go, that'll please people. And the idea is that when you take one of these cards, you put it underneath the appropriate location, and then it will generate a resource based on that location for every icon of its colored glyph that you see on the location and otherwise. And then the others have similar, but for the other ones, like one is very good for corn, one's good for wheat, one's good for seaweed, that type of thing. I think it's seaweed, I don't know. I lose track of what all 16 resources are in this game. And after you have placed one of the cards, you are then able to use what workers you have on the locations to do other effects. You could gather more resources on top of that, but for the most part you might use them on the top row where you can cook some resources, convert say an elk into meat and bones. You can craft and upgrade some of these tiles so that you flip them over and they become more efficient. You can furnish and trade, which effectively is leveling up 2 tracks and getting some bonuses, but mainly it's end of game point scoring. But the other thing you can do is clean, because your storage capacity is measured on your board, as I'm just going to use wool as the specific resource here, because I cannot be bothered to empty the rest of those, more on that later, by basically a system where you have one resource per square on here. And if I need to get more resources by any means, I have to move this little slider across. It increases capacity, but then at the end of a round it produces midden, which is effectively waste. Now, technically, midden wasn't entirely bad waste back then. You can read the book for the whole history on how it works, but basically waste is something that's going to clog up your resources and potentially give you negative points at the end of the game if you're not careful and let it go too far off the scale. So you do need to micromanage your waste to some extent. But these resources you will use on and off of these locations. So you're going to, put some on, take some back, and if you do the clean action, you can move the slider back potentially and try and micromanage it. But that's essentially what most of the game is. It is this micromanagement of 16 different resources with your workers, with the cards as you acquire more. So, you'll start making certain locations more lucrative than others. There's point scoring for having them in general and having like sets of colors. But you also have to have roof cards and enough food to feed them at the end of the round, because otherwise you have to discard some. So it's a resource management game with some feeding like you would expect. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that Skara Games doing this, not Uri Rosenberg, when you put in a feeding mechanic. On top of that, you can also have a unique location. You all have the same 9 locations, but you will start with a unique one that effectively is your 10th, and this gives you some other ability, but it's unique to everybody. So, hunt, boar, innovate, explore, build, muster, tend the land, spin wool, there's all sorts of different ones there. Play continues for those 12 turns effectively, 4 rounds of 3 turns each, until you get to the end, and in solo mode you have to get at least 45 points to be considered a winner, otherwise you lose. In multiplayer, well, obviously the one with the most points wins. Of course! So there is a good amount of production that has gone into this. All of these resources are, wooden pieces, they're different shapes. They're not just like squares and cubes or anything, and there's a lot of them. These tiles, good, thick, chunky tiles, double-sided with artwork on them. You've got the workers, you've got a lot of these cards with the usual, artwork that we've been used to seeing in Garfield games. So there's a fair amount in this box, and for a box that's not particularly huge either, it is packing quite a bit of stuff in here. Thankfully, it's not so much of a Tetris move in order to get everything in the box. Although to pack everything away and tear it down, oh my god, do I want to, burn a few settlements when I have to unpack and tear this game up. It's like, there's not a huge amount to set up here per se. This board, slider, 10 tiles here, shuffle the cards, nice and easy. Then you have to worry about these. Yes, they come in individual baggies effectively, right? And you're probably going to want to keep them individualized. But when you've got all of these on the table and you have to get a few of them out, each time and then put them away or something, particularly in a multiplayer game, this looks bad enough that I should be busted for a drugs trade or something at some point. But the teardown and setup is much longer than I want it to be. When you got to fiddle around with these rotten bags, like, all right, let me just get these out and we'll put those out right, and now I'm going to put these back in that one, put these back in that one. In multiplayer, it's not too bad, but in solo mode, it is an absolute chore. Now, Folded Space did an insert for this, where it's like everything's now compartmentalized, and then you can just put a different resource into all these different little trays, and then it will come out of the box in those trays. I honestly wish they charged us a few extra quid and put similar insert in the box to begin with, because honestly, I would have paid it. The Folded Space insert is practically mandatory for this game, and I hate the idea that you have bought a game that's not the cheapest in the world. This thing costs 950 quid. It's pretty expensive for what it is, and still you need to spend another 15 quid on top to get an insert that makes the setup actually bearable. So that does get on my nerves a bit. But that being said, when you get into the actual gameplay, well, the gameplay is fun, but this game pretty much is a solo game, and a lot of people will agree on this, although the ones who don't, I swear, are clasping at straws here, or they like to use that same excuse of, well, I like to play a game and socialize with people or something. It's like, yeah, I can sit around, I can literally sit in a circle on a chair and socialize with people, fellas. That's not an excuse. That is a cop-out. Learn a different defense, okay? This is a 1 to 4 player game that is basically a solo game. What is the multiplayer part? Literally this. a turn order mechanic. Basically, the cards that you have, instead of drawing so many and picking one out of the load, you have them set out, and the idea is that when it's your turn in the stack, you know, with a turn order marker, you decide whether to take a card or pass. And if you pass, you basically go last, but then you'll go first in the next round because you might like a card that's coming up. And that is it. I am done talking. Yeah, that is the multiplayer element entirely, because as soon as you've taken your card and you're doing stuff on your board, that is entirely solitaire. There is no other multiplayer interaction in the game bar that. You know, and yes, you can argue it's simultaneous, so therefore with 4 players, you know, you're doing stuff on your own board at the same time, so there shouldn't be too much downtime. To some extent there isn't. However, bear in mind that you're only as fast as your lowest common denominator. So if one person is particularly slow with dealing with all their resources stuff, you are going to be sat there for a while twiddling your thumbs waiting for them to finish. It's going to happen, and it has happened. Trust me. Honestly, if you're playing this game hoping it to be like a multiplayer thing you're going to do all the time, I would skip it and just stick to, you know, something else. This is a solo game. Now, as you play it solo, it is good fun. It's fun to micromanage these little resources. I do think 16 is a bit overkill. You know, as much as I say I like games with a lot of resources, this is probably like a step too far because you've only got so many locations and some of them just sort of blend into each other. Like this resource feels much like these 2 others and this one feels much like these 3 others. So, you know, it's kind of making it maybe a little bit more fiddly than it needs to be. But the little puzzle of trying to make the best of the cards you've drawn and come up with a strategy of how you're going to use your locations to the most efficient way to micromanage this slider in your storage, yeah, it's all pretty good fun. Solo mode does have the slight flaw though that because you are just drawing them off a deck and picking one at random, you may just end up with a situation where you're just not drawing the cards you want. It's alright saying, well, my strategy involves me getting a lot of wool, that probably means I'm going to need a bunch of wood and I'm going to need some of this and then as long as I can keep getting these, I should be fine. And then you start drawing the blue cards, which require you to have seaweed. And it's like, well, I don't want blue cards, okay? And it's getting you to draw stuff that you may not necessarily want at that particular time. And it's not too big a deal because you are drawing, you know, 4 cards to begin with. But then when you're only drawing 2, you may literally just get a choice of 2 rubbish cards and you gotta pick one. So it's like, fine, I'll take that one, I guess. Yeah, it would have been nice if maybe there was just like, you know, the multiplayer gives you the cards in advance so you can see what's coming up. Why can't the solo mode do that? Why can't I have a set of 4, 3, and 2? And then I basically have to say, right, well, I've got to pick one from here, but I know that I'm going to get this one later, and I know I'm going to get this one later. You could argue maybe that's a bit too much of an easy way going, but it would cut down the randomness factor, put it that way. Game is not long. I mean, an hour is pretty accurate. Multiplayer can take a bit longer with 4 players when you're explaining all the rules and you've got to, you know, deal with the lowest common denominator. But when you've got the rules down, you are talking about an hour for a solo game, which is pretty quick. You might even be able to get it down to 45 minutes if you're particularly fast. I think 30 minutes, you're not really concentrating on the game long enough. You're just zipping along like Speedy Gonzales. So if you lose, tough. Although losing is something you're going to do a lot in this game. This game is absolute, like, this is crazy hard to win it. You need 45 points to win. It says 55 is a like bloody good score. So there's only 10-point difference between actually winning the game and having a fantastic score according to the rulebook. It is hard to get 45 points, and some of it seems a little counterintuitive, much like some of the iconography is a little bit counterintuitive in places, it has to be said, but it's not too bad. And it's all in the book, so you can check it. But the thing with this is that I had a game in my first couple of games where it was a solo game, and what happens with the solo mode that I haven't mentioned is that you get these task cards. So these task cards basically have requirements that if you do them during the game, you'll get a bonus, but if you don't, you'll lose points, and there's an objective for the end of the game, again, to not lose points. But I had one that said have minimal waste, like 2 or less waste. So for the whole game, I was really low on the waste. Like I barely ever had 2 at any one time. I was doing the clean, I was keeping it manageable, using what resource space I had with only 1 or 2 waste production, and doing a pretty good job of keeping things nice and clean. And I was still not able to get 45 points. I was still only able to get into the high 30s and that. And it just seems a bit weird that I can be the most efficient, clean settlement in the world and still not have enough to cater for your 45 victory point target. I think maybe that target should have been a bit lower or something, you know, because to get 55, I mean, that is insane. To get 45 is already hard enough. The Unique tiles, I mean, these are pretty cool, although replay value is a little bit limited because with the 9 tiles you've got, there's only so many ways you can go about using them, and once you've got a couple of games under your belt, you start seeing, alright, I should probably focus on these aspects. The one unique one is cool, but you may find yourself using it, you may find yourself not. And if you are going to use it, you pretty much base your entire strategy around it, and if you ignore it, then, well, you just ignore it and just go focus on something else. It's, you know, not really that big a deal. They all want some degree of bones and food, so, you know, they all operate under the same cost requirement. But it's like, yeah, you either use it lots or you don't use it at all. It's entirely up to you. But with the scoring, I kind of find that you spend a lot of time dealing with these 2 tracks. I forget what they call the furnish track and the trade track. Because so the points that you get from other stuff, like how many settlers you've got and upgraded tiles, doesn't compare to the amount of points that you're going to get from these 2 tracks. And again, I feel like I'm being pigeonholed into focusing on this aspect. You know, if you ignore these tracks, you will lose. You will lose the multiplayer game, you will lose the solo game. You just cannot physically make up those points. But then you can't really do them a little bit either. You need to either do well in both, which is bloody hard, or you need to choose one of them and kind of max it out. You can't afford to just dabble a little bit. You simply won't have enough points. And, you know, again, I wish I wasn't forced to have to deal with this aspect. I want to be able to do whatever I feel like and still do well. But if you do ignore these and go for, like, just really cool resource manipulation, upgrading all your tiles and stuff, you simply won't get the points. You need to get them from these tracks. I know people might argue that's kind of the focus of the game, but then couldn't we have had a few more branching paths, you know, because when a lot of these resources kind of blend into each other, I mean, if I spend one game getting deer and turning that into food, it's not that much different from if I decide I'm going to get fish and turn that into food. I mean, it's, you know, it's a piece of meat that turns into some degree of bones and meat, you know, it's not a fundamental difference.
Salted pork.
So Skara Brae is a decent game overall, but it's not quite the powerhouse that some people have made it out to be. The replay value is a little lacking, you know, especially when you've got to focus on one of these 2 tracks in order to do well. The rest of it is kind of a means to an end. The extra tile that you have, the 10th tile, adds a little bit of replay value, but you may or may not even care about it when you're playing it in your game. 16 resources does seem a little bit overkill. I could have, you know, we could have had a few less and made the game a little bit less fit in that respect. Not to mention it's kind of forcing you to buy an insert in order to not have setup and teardown be an absolute chore by yourself with having to unbag and rebag all these resources. Paying £50 for a game that effectively I'm playing by myself, I mean, you know, player boards and all these tiles that I've spent money on for other players to use, might as well have not been in the game, and this could have probably cost me 15-20 quid if I bought it with, you know, 25 quid max if I bought it and it just had solo components in it, because the multiplayer aspect is so negligible that it barely counts. Shipwrights of the North Sea Redux can be compared to this because that was a similar deal. The drafting in that game was the only thing that made it multiplayer. And even then, it wasn't that big a deal. So Shipwrights of the North Sea, which is still on my shelf, is essentially a solo game. Which one do I prefer out of the 2? I kind of am more leaning towards Shipwrights in the North Sea being better, I think. I think that one with the card system and, you know, getting a bunch of resources and spending them in one big go on, you know, building a big ship, you know, that sounds pretty cool. This one feels like you're doing a lot of little micromanaging bits every now and again, and you never feel like it turns into something big. You know, it's like I took these, you know, this little bit of wool and this bit of corn, and I turned it into a flipped tile, or I turned it into some seaweed and some seashells or whatever, and it never feels quite as epic a turn. You never feel like you get something really powerful for the work you're doing. It's more, I'll turn this into this now, this into this now, this into this now, and it's like, you know, it's still good. It's still a good puzzle. It's still easy to play. You know, it's still quick to play. I mean, you know, an hour is about as long as it should take, providing lowest common denominator or just playing it solo. I mean, it would not take you more than an hour playing it solo once you've got the rules down. Bit longer for your first game, but after that, boom, hour and you're done. So it does a good length, and it is produced well. You're paying £50 odd for it, which is a lot, but, you know, it's still produced well, looks good on the table, and like I say, it's overall a fun affair, but yeah, it's just not quite as amazing as some have made out. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10 overall. It's a good game. I recommend it for, you know, some Euro fans, some Garfield game fans as well. If you like resource management, then, you know, this has got it in spades. But yeah, it's about a 7 for me. It's good. I'm kind of umming and ahhing as to whether I want to keep it. It's a small enough box that could fit on the shelf, but do I want to hang on to it when I've already got Shipwrights in the North Sea? I might have to say, I mean, I do think Shipwrights in the North Sea is a bit better. I think I gave that one an 8 out of 10. You know, this one's more of a 7. But it's definitely one of the better of this historical line that I've played so far. You know, out of all the others, I've mainly given a 5 or a 6 out of 10. This is definitely so far my favourite of these historical ones that they've done. I know 7 out of 10, you know, is not the highest rank in the world, but it's still a good game. It's still one that I would come back to every now and again, whip it out, play a bit of resource management, put it away, leave it for a bit, come back out, play it again. You know, it's not one that I would, you know, want to play over and over again. Maybe I would play 2 games in a row just because it only takes about an hour, but for me, I quite like a solo game to be out, done, back in the box, move on to another part of my day or something. You know, I don't like solo games to take forever, and I don't like to, you know, spend ages and ages and ages just playing solo games in general. You know, I like to do other things as well. So, yeah, like I say, 7, it's good. It's not amazing. You know, I've seen some 9s and 10s, and I'm not quite seeing that myself. You know, I think some of those people are forgiving the lack of multiplayer interaction quite heavily when I hear them sort of go, oh yeah, I love playing this with my 3 friends, and it's like, you really might as well have just played it by yourself because it is 99% the same game, so why bother? But, you know, different strokes for different folks. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Check out the rest of my content. There should be a review out for the recent Baghdad from Alley Cat Games. I also did their Ader's Dream. I've done plenty of videos on the South Tigris series for Garfield Games, so by all means check those, as well as all the expansions that I did. I went through every one of the expansions for the Tigris series and reviewed those. Plenty of content coming. And of course, I'll get round to the Anarchy when I've had a chance to learn it. But that will probably be after Essen, I suspect. So, yeah, just be patient for that one. Never! So take care, and remember, regardless of whether your board gaming table is going to look mighty suspicious to a passing officer, it's still only a game, so bye for now.